When the empath stops explaining, peace finally begins. Silence is a source of great strength. Lao Tzu. There comes a time in every empath's journey when explaining, defending, and justifying your heart no longer feels like peace. It feels like exhaustion. True serenity begins when you stop needing to be understood by those still asleep to their own inner world. In this video, we'll explore the moment an empath finally chooses quiet over chaos and understanding over approval. As you listen, reflect on your own life. Have you reached that sacred point where peace matters more than validation? Share your thoughts below, and let's grow together on this path of spiritual wisdom and awakening. 1. The end of explanation marks the beginning of peace. Peace arises the moment the empath no longer needs to be understood, because the need to explain has always been a residue of childhood conditioning, a quiet belief that love must be earned through justification. From a young age, the empath learns that harmony comes only when others approve, that to be accepted means to make everyone else feel comfortable. So they grow into peacemakers, constantly translating pain into understanding, soothing storms that were never theirs to calm. But through spirituality and spiritual awakening, they begin to see that the endless act of explaining was never an expression of love. It was a cry for belonging. The moment this realization dawns, silence becomes the most powerful form of self-love. To allow misunderstanding without fear is not indifference. It is mastery. It is the moment the empath reclaims the fragments of their energy scattered across years of over-explaining and emotional labor. They begin to understand that not every truth needs to be defended, and not every distortion deserves correction. As Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The empath realizes that the urge to explain often hides a deep insecurity, the fear of being misjudged, unloved, or abandoned. But once they awaken, they see that real love does not require proof. The soul does not beg to be seen. It simply shines. In this higher awareness, peace no longer depends on validation. It comes from the quiet knowing that your heart remains pure, even when others project their shadows onto you. The empath learns to rest in this stillness, to speak less and feel more, to observe instead of react. They start to see that trying to make others understand is like pouring light into a closed jar. It only exhausts you. Through the lens of spirituality, they discover that silence is not emptiness. It is sacred space. It is the field where the soul expands, where the divine whispers louder than the noise of misunderstanding. The more they awaken, the more the empath recognizes how explaining used to drain their life force. Every defense was a small betrayal of self, an energetic transaction where peace was traded for approval. But now, they choose a different path, the path of quiet confidence. Their silence no longer hides pain. It radiates strength. They no longer chase closure because they realize peace was never something to achieve, but something to allow. Those who are meant to understand will feel their truth in the stillness, while those who cannot are simply lessons that taught them detachment. This is the sacred maturity of the awakened empath, to let misunderstanding exist without losing inner balance. It takes courage to stand in truth while others misinterpret your light, to stay calm when accused of being distant or cold. Yet in this very moment, the empath transcends their old identity as the fixer. They no longer seek to heal through explanation, but through presence. They no longer try to convince, they embody. In this state, peace is no longer an outcome. It becomes their nature. Comment below, I choose peace over explanation, if you're ready to let go of the need to be understood and embrace your inner calm. 2. The false virtue of self-erasure. Empaths often grow up believing that love means endless sacrifice, that compassion is proven by how much pain they can carry for others. Yet this illusion only leads them into a cycle of self-erasure, where their worth becomes tied to how much they give, explain, and endure. They absorb other people's emotions, justify every misunderstanding, and constantly over-explain their intentions, all while silently draining their own life force. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But when an empath keeps explaining themselves to those who do not listen, they abandon that privilege. They fall into the archetype of the persecuted healer, the one who bleeds to keep others warm. This endless explanation becomes a subtle form of self-neglect, disguised as kindness, yet built upon fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, and fear of being misunderstood. The more they explain, the more they tie invisible cords to people who thrive on their energy. Real compassion, however, has boundaries. It is not about carrying someone's emotional weight, but about allowing them to carry their own. When an empath learns to stop explaining, they begin to trust silence more than defense, presence more than persuasion. Their energy, once scattered across countless explanations, starts to return home. They realize that spirituality is not about being endlessly available, but about being deeply aligned with one's truth. True compassion flows from clarity, not exhaustion. The moment you stop justifying yourself to those who never cared to understand, your energy shifts. You move from survival to serenity, from reaction to response. You begin to understand that peace is not achieved by controlling others' perceptions, but by mastering your own vibration. This is where spiritual development truly begins, when the empath finally realizes that their role is not to fix or prove, but to be. Silence becomes their strength, boundaries their prayer, and solitude their teacher. No longer chained to the need for validation, they discover a new form of freedom, one where love is no longer transactional, but sovereign. The peace that follows is not the absence of noise, but the presence of alignment. It is the quiet knowing that your worth has never depended on explanation. In this stillness, the empath transforms from a wounded giver into a conscious creator, channeling energy not into pleasing others, but into becoming whole again. And in that sacred balance between compassion and self-respect, they finally experience the profound serenity that spirituality was always meant to bring. Have you ever caught yourself dimming your own light just to keep others comfortable? If so, share your story in the comments below. Your voice may help someone reclaim theirs. And if you're still learning to stop erasing yourself, comment, "I choose to shine," so we can walk this path of self-worth and peace together. 3. Silence as spiritual power. Silence is not emptiness. It is spiritual power in motion. When you, as an empath, finally stop explaining yourself to those who twist your words or drain your peace, you begin to feel an energy shift inside you. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. And in silence, that hidden order reveals itself." You start to understand that silence does not mean weakness, it means wisdom. The moment you stop feeding the noise with explanations, those who used guilt to control you lose their power. Silence becomes your sacred boundary, a mirror reflecting truth without needing defense. It is not about being cold or distant. It is about choosing peace over chaos, alignment over validation, and energy preservation over emotional exhaustion. Empaths often carry the burden of over-explaining because they fear being misunderstood. They give endless reasons, hoping to prove their good heart, not realizing that their constant explanations are emotional leaks. Spiritual wisdom teaches that truth does not demand justification. It simply exists. When you embrace this awareness, you begin to hold your silence like a crown. Your calm becomes your language. Your restraint becomes your strength. Those who once thrived on your reactions start to fade because they can no longer feed on your emotional openness. Silence teaches discernment. It shows you who listens to understand and who listens to manipulate. Carl Jung believed that what we resist persists, and through silence, you stop resisting. You no longer chase understanding from those unwilling to meet you there. Instead, you reclaim your inner order, finding peace not through being heard, but through being still. Silence exposes false intentions without argument. It makes people confront the emptiness of their own projections. When you stop explaining, your energy speaks louder than any words could. It whispers self-respect, self-trust, and divine awareness. You begin to realize that peace was never something external to achieve. It was an inner vibration to return to. Through spiritual awakening, you understand that not every storm needs your response. Not every misunderstanding needs your energy. And not every person deserves access to your truth. Silence is the ultimate form of self-mastery. It turns pain into power, chaos into clarity, and confusion into confidence. It teaches you that you don't need to defend who you are when you live in alignment with your soul. The empath who stops explaining is no longer trying to be understood. They are simply being. And in that beingness, peace does not just begin, it becomes the natural state of your existence. 4. Individuation and psychological maturity. Carl Jung's profound principle of individuation reveals itself in the empath's silent transformation, the moment they stop explaining and begin embodying peace. To explain endlessly is to wear the persona, the social mask Jung described as the part of us that seeks approval and safety through pleasing others. The empath, driven by deep sensitivity, has often mistaken explaining for connection and over-understanding for love. Yet in spirituality and spiritual awakening, the soul begins to see that explanation is a defense mechanism of fear. The fear of being unseen, unheard, or misunderstood. True maturity, Jung taught, is born when the self integrates both the light and the shadow, and no longer relies on outer validation to confirm inner truth. The empath's journey, then, is not about convincing others to understand them, but about standing in quiet alignment with who they truly are. When you stop explaining, you reclaim your energy from the chaos of misunderstanding. You begin to realize that not everyone is meant to meet you in your depth. And that is not rejection, it is redirection toward inner sovereignty. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The empath learns to see criticism, projection, and disbelief not as personal attacks, but as mirrors of human limitation. In that recognition, the empath evolves from emotional dependency to inner mastery. This is the stage of individuation where peace replaces people-pleasing and stillness becomes stronger than speech. Silence, once painful, now becomes sacred because it no longer hides fear. It holds power. Spiritual awakening brings clarity. You see that your need to explain was never about others understanding you, but about you trying to prove your worth. As consciousness deepens, you discover that your worth never needed proof. It only needed recognition from within. Every misunderstanding becomes a test of your alignment. Every moment of silence, a chance to affirm your truth without words. The empath learns that when you understand yourself, you stop chasing others' understanding. You no longer explain your kindness, your boundaries, or your intuition. You allow your energy to speak where words would only distort. This is the quiet revolution of maturity, choosing peace over performance, self-validation over external approval, and authenticity over adaptation. Through the lens of Jungian wisdom, this transformation marks the merging of the conscious and unconscious, the birth of wholeness. You stand unshaken, aware that explaining is a habit of the fragmented self, while silence is the language of the integrated soul. To embody peace is to live without the need to defend it. To embrace misunderstanding is to understand that not everyone can perceive at your level of awareness. And in that acceptance, the empath transcends the cycle of justification and enters the realm of freedom. This is what Jung called the individuation process, the path of returning to one's center, where the self no longer seeks to be seen, but to be. When the empath stops explaining, they finally awaken into the purest form of power, peace that requires no witness. Don't forget to subscribe for more spiritual wisdom on mastering individuation and achieving true psychological maturity. Your journey toward inner peace begins here. 5. Surrendering to the depths. Empaths often try to stay above the emotional storm, explaining their feelings and actions to be understood, hoping logic can soothe what the heart feels too deeply. Yet the more they explain, the further they drift from themselves. Real peace does not come from being understood. It comes from surrender. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is the essence of spirituality, to dive into the unconscious, to let the flood of emotions rise and baptize the soul instead of resisting it. When you stop trying to control how others see you, when you stop overanalyzing every feeling to make it acceptable, you begin to touch the sacred silence that lives beneath the surface of words. It is in that quiet space that your spirit breathes again, no longer trapped in the endless effort to be seen, validated, or understood. This is where true spiritual development begins, in the surrender, in the willingness to let go of the armor of explanation and to trust the deep intelligence of your own being. You realize that not everyone is capable of feeling what you feel or seeing life through the same emotional lens, and that is not your burden to carry. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a compass. And when you stop trying to justify your depth, it starts guiding you home. Like water returning to its natural flow, your energy stabilizes when you stop fighting the current. You are no longer afraid of the depth, for you understand that the unconscious of the vast ocean within is not an enemy, but a healer. Its waves do not come to drown you. They come to cleanse you, to release the heaviness of constantly performing emotional understanding. Surrendering, then, is not weakness, but wisdom. It is a sacred act of faith, a choice to trust the rhythm of life instead of micromanaging it through over-explanation. When you surrender, you let silence speak for you. You no longer chase clarity through conversation because your peace no longer depends on anyone's approval. The stillness within you becomes your anchor, and from that place, your presence begins to communicate more powerfully than your words ever could. This is the turning point for the empath, when you stop explaining your heart and simply live it. The noise fades, the anxiety softens, and peace arises like sunlight breaking through the water's surface. You understand that your role is not to be understood by all, but to remain rooted in compassion without losing yourself. The depth of your emotions becomes your sanctuary, not your struggle. And from that quiet surrender, you finally discover that peace was never something to achieve. It was always waiting beneath the surface, in the silence where your soul finally rests. 6. Silence as inner alchemy. Each time you try to explain yourself, a small part of your energy escapes into the air like mist. But silence, in its sacred stillness, gathers it back and refines it into light. Through silence, the empath no longer bleeds energy through endless justification. Instead, their inner world becomes radiant, calm, and powerful. What once felt like emotional detachment is actually transformation in disguise, a deep shift from needing to be understood to simply being. As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you can only become that through stillness. Every moment you stop defending your truth, your energy stops leaking. Your silence becomes a container of power, and your peace begins to speak louder than any explanation ever could. When you stop explaining, your vibration stabilizes. You begin to see that silence is not withdrawal, but mastery, the kind of mastery that comes from spiritual wisdom, from realizing that not everyone is meant to hear your truth. The empath, who once carried the emotional chaos of others, starts to stand firm in their own energy, glowing quietly with self-assurance. In the silence, your frequency rises. Your presence begins to heal without words. You start to feel life breathing through you, not demanding, not proving, just flowing. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Silence is that moment of awakening when you become aware of your inner rhythm, when you stop reacting and begin observing with clarity. As this awareness deepens, you realize silence is not emptiness, but divine fullness. You no longer chase understanding. You embody it. You no longer plead for acceptance. You radiate authenticity. In the quiet, the empath's energy refines into something magnetic, calm, commanding, and deeply healing. You communicate now, not through defense, but through presence, not through noise, but through essence. Every breath becomes a statement, every still moment a declaration of self-sovereignty. The world feels your energy before it hears your voice. And in that sacred silence, your inner alchemy turns misunderstanding into peace, pain into wisdom, and isolation into divine protection. Your silence is not avoidance. It is evolution, the spiritual awakening that teaches you that sometimes the loudest truth is said without a single word. Stay connected with our community of spiritual wisdom by subscribing to Spiritual Wisdom. Here, we explore the power of silence, inner peace, and spiritual awakening. Remember, true transformation begins not in noise, but in the quiet alchemy of your soul. 7. The shift from empath to sage. The empath evolves into what Carl Jung would call the sage archetype, a being who feels deeply, yet is no longer consumed by emotion, who loves without losing themselves, and who helps without rescuing. This transformation is not about shutting down empathy, but about refining it into conscious awareness. It is the moment when you begin to sense everything around you, but are no longer defined by it. You feel without absorbing. You understand without interfering. The once overwhelming sensitivity that used to drown you now becomes serenity. You stop trying to fix people and instead begin to harmonize with life itself. You see that some souls need to experience their own storms to awaken, and by rushing to save them, you would rob them of the very wisdom their pain is meant to bring. So, you learn to stay present without absorbing their chaos, to care without carrying, to love without losing your center. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Your peace becomes more important than your need to be right, and your silence becomes your new form of communication. The calm energy you embody starts speaking louder than any justification ever could. You finally understand that boundaries are not walls. They are sacred edges that protect the temple of your energy. You no longer chase after those who mistake your compassion for weakness, because you now realize that true spirituality is not self-sacrifice, it is self-honoring. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And in this awakening, you finally begin to live that truth. You stop rescuing others from their lessons, allowing the universe to teach what only experience can. Through this shift, you begin to see that every connection is an energetic exchange. Overgiving creates imbalance. Explaining drains your essence. But when you hold your ground with quiet certainty, the energy realigns itself naturally. You stop performing for love and start radiating authenticity. You trust that what is meant for you will recognize your frequency without persuasion. This is spiritual wisdom in motion, a serenity born from self-awareness and emotional maturity. You no longer see peace as the absence of pain, but as the presence of understanding. Your spirituality and spiritual awakening are no longer about floating above the world, but standing firmly within it, clear, centered, and sovereign. You have become the sage who listens more than speaks, observes more than reacts, and feels everything without being undone by it. And in that stillness, you find the quiet miracle that was waiting for you all along. Freedom through peace, wisdom through detachment, and love through wholeness. Do you feel this transformation within you? If you do, claim it now in the comments. I am evolving from empath to sage, calm, wise, and free. 8. Boundaries as sacred vessels of love. Love without boundaries is chaos. For when love loses its sacred shape, it begins to consume rather than create. In the path of spirituality and spiritual development, you will come to realize that silence and no are not signs of rejection, but of self-respect, the purest expressions of love that protect your dignity. Saying no does not close your heart. It clears space for peace to enter. The empath eventually learns that boundaries are not walls, but vessels through which divine love flows freely, without distortion or depletion. Boundaries give love its rhythm, its balance, its holiness. They remind you that unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. It means honoring what is sacred within you so that love remains whole, not scattered among those who take without giving. The empath's heart often feels compelled to explain, to heal, to justify. Yet every unnecessary explanation is a silent confession of self-doubt. You cannot convince others of your purity if they are committed to misunderstanding it. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." To live that truth, you must stop defending your kindness to those who benefit from your confusion. When you stop explaining, you reclaim the energy once used to prove your worth. You turn that energy inward, and in that inward turning, peace begins to rise like the dawn after a long storm. Silence, once feared as emptiness, becomes your greatest teacher. It teaches that peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of clarity. Boundaries are love with structure. They protect what is divine in you while allowing others to meet you in mutual respect. Each no you speak from the heart is an act of devotion to your higher self. It says, "I will not abandon my soul for acceptance." In doing so, you transform love from chaos into order, from codependency into sacred connection. You begin to understand that real empathy is not absorbing everyone's pain. It is standing in love's truth without drowning in its illusion. It is the wisdom to know that compassion without balance leads to self-erasure. When you protect your energy, you protect the very source through which love expresses itself. As your spiritual development deepens, you realize that peace does not require explanation. It requires alignment. The empath, who once feared being misunderstood, now cherishes being at peace more than being approved. You stop arguing to be seen and start choosing to be still. You stop performing for love and start embodying it. And as you hold your ground in silence, those meant for you will feel your truth without needing words. Boundaries become the quiet language of self-respect, the invisible aura that shields your light. They are not barriers to love. They are love matured, refined by experience and sanctified by truth. In this sacred stillness, love returns to its purest form, rooted, peaceful, and divine. 9. Transformation through solitude. After silence comes loneliness, the dark night of the empath's soul. But this solitude is not a curse. It is purification. In the quiet, everything false begins to fall away. The ego loses its grip, and what's left is the soul, raw and luminous. You stop explaining yourself to those who can't feel your heart, and instead, you begin to listen to the deeper voice within. As Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." When you finally turn inward, you realize that silence is not emptiness. It is truth in its purest form, a bridge between the seen and unseen. Your silence becomes prayer, and prayer becomes energy. Every thought, every feeling you once tried to justify, transforms into light. You no longer seek to be understood because you begin to understand yourself. This is the essence of spiritual wisdom, to know that peace does not come from convincing others, but from resting in your own clarity. Stillness replaces speech, and the language of the Spirit begins to speak louder than words ever could. You start to recognize that explanation is an energy leak, and the moment you stop leaking, your power returns home. In solitude, your sensitivity turns into strength. The same depth that once made you feel overwhelmed now makes you aware. You see that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, that boundaries are acts of love, not walls of fear. Peace arises not from being seen, but from seeing clearly. The less you explain, the lighter you become, because explaining was never your job. Healing was. You start to see your silence as protection, your distance as devotion, your detachment as wisdom. Jung taught that healing is not about perfection, but wholeness, and this is where that truth begins to unfold. When you no longer need to prove, only to be. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you choose mastery over chaos. You learn that the universe doesn't reward explanation, it rewards alignment. Your energy begins to mirror peace itself, vibrating on the frequency of trust. You stop reaching for closure in conversations and start finding closure in your own calm. We hope this reflection on transformation through solitude has inspired you to embrace the sacred silence where true growth begins. If you're ready to honor your own journey of spiritual awakening and inner peace, comment, "I choose solitude," below. Your words remind others that stillness can be the most powerful teacher of all. 10. The return to the self. The empath's path is a quiet return to the origin, where feeling becomes the highest form of awareness. Once, every emotion was heavy. Every vibration around felt like thunder in your chest, and you tried endlessly to make others understand what you could barely express. You explained your love, justified your pain, and carried the emotional weight of those who could not carry their own. But the true turning point comes when you stop trying to be understood and begin to understand yourself. As Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. This is where spirituality begins, not in the search for answers outside, but in the still recognition that everything you've been seeking already lives within you. The empath who once drowned in emotion now learns to breathe through it, realizing that feeling deeply is not a burden, but divine communication, a sacred language of the soul. When you stop explaining, something miraculous happens. Peace finds you. You no longer feel the need to defend your intentions or soften your truth for the comfort of others. You stop apologizing for your depth. You begin to see that your sensitivity was never weakness. It was spiritual intelligence in disguise, a higher consciousness working through your heart. You start embodying the energy you once tried to explain. Love becomes your presence. Truth becomes your aura. And compassion becomes your quiet strength. You learn to stay centered, even in chaos, because your peace no longer depends on how others treat you. It depends on how deeply you stay connected to your own essence. In this awareness, you realize that silence speaks louder than explanation, and your energy says more than your words ever could. Every empath must walk through the valley of overgiving to arrive at the mountain of inner power. You stop rescuing those who refuse to rise and begin honoring the sacred boundaries that protect your spirit. You see now that not everyone deserves access to your light, and that walking away is not cruelty, it is alignment. The same heart that once begged to be understood now glows in quiet confidence, radiating serenity without seeking validation. You embody what Jung called the individuation process, where you become whole, no longer fragmented by others' expectations. This is the true mark of spiritual awakening, when your empathy no longer drains you, because it flows from divine consciousness rather than emotional survival. You no longer chase love, you become it. And in that becoming, feeling transforms into revelation. You sense the universe whispering through your emotions, guiding you gently toward truth. Pain no longer terrifies you because it has become your teacher, showing you where you once abandoned yourself. Each breath, each heartbeat is now infused with awareness. You exist not as a reaction, but as a reflection of divine stillness. The empath who once suffered now radiates silent love, a calm mirror in a restless world. You understand now that peace is not the absence of feeling, it is the sacred mastery of it. You do not explain love, truth, or pain anymore. You embody them. You are no longer just an empath. You are a presence itself, a vessel of spiritual wisdom, a living expression of divine consciousness. And so, dear soul, remember this. When the empath finally stops explaining, peace doesn't just visit, it takes root within. You no longer need to justify your sensitivity, your silence, or your boundaries. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is not the absence of love, but its complement." True spiritual wisdom begins when you stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. From that moment, your energy becomes sacred, your presence becomes powerful, and your peace becomes non-negotiable. If this message from spiritual wisdom spoke to your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming journeys into the depths of consciousness, empathy, and awakening. Your peace begins here. Choose it, nurture it, and never apologize for it. Most people never make it through awakening. Alan Watts explains the dark test of the soul. The most difficult part of the spiritual journey is not waking up, it's staying awake. Alan Watts once suggested that true awakening feels less like enlightenment and more like a collapse of everything you thought was real. In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving into why most people never make it through this awakening and how the dark test of the soul is actually the beginning of your greatest transformation. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you ever experienced a moment when the world felt strangely unified, as if the boundaries between you and everything else dissolved? If so, share your experience in the comments below. Your insight may help someone else on their path. 1. The illusion of the separate self is shattered during awakening. Most people move through life tightly attached to a personal storyline. Your name, your memories, your roles, your beliefs. Yet Alan Watts reminds us that this separate self is only a mask, and the true process of spiritual awakening begins the moment that mask starts to crack. You may not notice it at first, but it appears in those strange, sacred moments when the boundaries of you dissolve. When a piece of music absorbs you so completely that the listener disappears. When standing under trees makes you feel as if nature is not around you, but happening through you. Or when washing dishes becomes so effortless that there is no doer. Only the simple movement of water and light. These moments are not accidents. They are small fractures in the illusion, revealing that the separate self you have been defending your entire life is not the fixed identity you believed it was. And this is exactly why awakening feels frightening, because the mind interprets the dissolving of identity as death, even though it is the beginning of clarity. As this illusion starts to fall apart, the mind instinctively panics and clings harder to labels, opinions, routines, and familiar emotional patterns. It tries to rebuild the image of me again and again because it believes survival depends on it. But spiritual awakening is the gentle invitation to see this panic without becoming it, to notice fear as an echo of habit rather than a sign of danger. When you allow the moment to unfold without rushing to rebuild your story, you begin to sense something deeper, that what you truly are is not the identity you perform, but the awareness that silently witnesses everything, every thought, every emotion, every role rising and fading within it. From this space, life changes in subtle but powerful ways. Relationships soften because you no longer argue to protect a fragile image of yourself. Creativity flows more naturally because it no longer needs to impress anyone. Even simple routines feel lighter because you stop pretending there is a separate you, controlling everything, and instead, you participate in life as it unfolds. This is the heart of spirituality and the essence of spiritual awakening. The discovery that separation was a story told by the mind, not the truth of your existence. Still, the mind will resist. It will ask, who am I without my story? What happens if I let go? And the compassionate response is simply to watch these questions arise and dissolve like any other thought. You do not need to answer them. You only need to stay present long enough to see that nothing essential is being lost, only the illusion that kept you small. The dark test of the soul is not a battle to be won, but a series of quiet moments in which you choose presence over panic, awareness over identity, openness over fear. And in those moments, the illusion of the separate self collapses naturally, revealing a deeper, calmer, more honest way of living, one in which softness becomes strength, unity becomes clarity, and life itself becomes the teacher guiding you forward. If you're ready to break free from the illusion of the separate self, comment below, I choose awakening. Let this be your commitment to seeing life with new eyes and stepping boldly into your spiritual transformation. 2. Awakening is a collapse, not a comfort. Awakening is a collapse, not a comfort. And when Alan Watts explored this truth, he revealed that spiritual awakening is not the peaceful rising most people fantasize about, but a profound collapse of everything you believed yourself to be, a shattering of the personal narrative you spent years building. You feel the psychological map of me begin to disintegrate, and as this inner structure falls apart, you step into a raw sense of groundlessness where your mind loses the familiar reference points it once clung to for safety. The ego, terrified of losing control, interprets this as danger, as if something essential within you is dying, and so it urges you to return to old habits, old identities, and old stories, because they offer the illusion of stability. This is why Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about gaining something new, but about watching what is false fall away. Because what collapses is never your true self, but the layers of conditioning that have wrapped around you for years. As this collapse deepens, you feel the tension between who you were taught to be and who you truly are. And this tension becomes the dark test of the soul. Most people turn back at this threshold, not because awakening is impossible, but because the disorientation feels unbearable. They have never been taught that losing the false self is part of genuine spirituality and essential for real spiritual development. You, however, are being invited to stay with the discomfort long enough to see what exists beneath it. When your identity starts dissolving, it can feel like the floor of your life has fallen open. Yet this emptiness is not a void meant to swallow you. It is room for you to expand, to see beyond the rigid personality you used to defend so fiercely. In these moments, you meet the part of yourself that has always watched from the background, the awareness untouched by your past, your roles, your successes, or your traumas. This awareness is not collapsing, it is emerging. As you allow the collapse to unfold, you begin to understand that awakening is less like climbing a ladder and more like shedding a heavy skin. You do not become someone new. You stop pretending to be someone you never were. And even though your mind may resist, insisting that certainty is safer than truth, you slowly recognize that the collapse is not destroying you. It is dissolving your illusions, one by one, until only what is real remains. The fear you feel is simply the ego losing its grip, and the confusion you feel is the old narrative unraveling, making space for a deeper, quieter clarity to rise. This is the moment when spiritual development becomes visible, not as an idea you talk about, but as an inner shift you can feel in your bones. Awakening asks you to surrender the comfort of your old identity and trust the unknown that opens inside you. It asks you to let the collapse happen without running from it, without distracting yourself, without trying to rebuild your old life. Because when the collapse finishes, you realize that nothing essential was lost. Only the walls around your true self crumbled. The me you thought you were dissolves, and the awareness you truly are steps forward, steady, spacious, and unafraid. And as Alan Watts said, you do not transform yourself, you simply get out of your own way, reminding you that awakening is not about effort, it is about allowing. If this message resonates with your awakening journey, comment below. I choose inner truth over comfort. 3. Spiritual ego is the most seductive trap. The most deceptive obstacle on the path of awakening is the rise of the spiritual ego. And you need to understand this clearly because it appears precisely at the moment when you believe you've escaped ego altogether. After your old identity collapses and the beliefs that once defined you begin to crumble, the mind instinctively searches for a new story to attach itself to. And often, it chooses the most seductive story of all, the identity of being spiritual, being awakened, being a seeker of truth. You begin to think of yourself not as the person you once were, but as the meditator, the mystic, the enlightened one. And although these labels look pure, they are still labels, still masks, still roles you perform for yourself. Alan Watts warned that the biggest ego trip is getting rid of the ego. And when Carl Jung said, "Beware of unearned wisdom," he was pointing to the same danger. The mind can turn even your spiritual progress into another badge of superiority. This is why spiritual materialism is so seductive. You start collecting mystical experiences the way others collect status symbols, admiring your own insight, your calmness, your intuition, your connection to the universe, and instead of dissolving ego, you secretly strengthen it. You meditate not for inner freedom, but for spiritual identity. You chase synchronicities, not to listen, but to be validated. You talk about energy, awakening, or signs not to share truth, but to feel like you belong to a higher world. Yet all of this is still ego dressed in sacred clothing. As this illusion deepens, you drift from genuine awakening and move into a performance of spirituality. You try to look awakened, sound awakened, behave awakened, but the more you perform it, the further you drift from the truth. The spiritual ego wants to feel chosen, elevated, special, and it whispers, "You are different from them," creating a subtle divide between you and the world, even as you believe you are transcending separation. This is why the trap is so dangerous. It feels righteous, noble, and enlightened. But true spiritual wisdom strips away not only your old identity, but also the spiritual identity you build to replace it. Because authentic awakening has no interest in titles, roles, or being spiritual. Real awakening is quiet, humble, soft, and deeply human. It makes you more grounded, not more special. More compassionate, not more superior. More aware, not more inflated. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that awakening is not something you wear like a robe. It is something you live through sincerity, honesty, and a willingness to see your own shadow without hiding behind sacred language or mystical airs. When you begin to see this clearly, you understand what both Alan Watts and Carl Jung were trying to tell you. That ego can survive even its own death, that it can disguise itself as light, and that the real test of the soul is not whether you look spiritual, but whether you can release every identity, good, bad, sacred, or ordinary, and stand in the truth without needing to be anything at all. Only then does awakening begin to reveal itself, not as a title or a personality, but as a quiet unfolding of freedom, presence, and reality as it is, without performance, without pretense, and without the seductive mask of the spiritual ego. 4. Teachers and gurus can become new attachments. Teachers and gurus often appear as lights on the path, yet that light becomes dangerous the moment you turn it into a substitute for your own seeing, because the subtle trap of spirituality is not in following a teacher, but in believing that someone else can finish the journey for you. You may admire a guru's clarity, their confidence, or the way their presence calms the room. And at first, this admiration feels innocent. But slowly, quietly, it can grow into dependency. And dependency becomes the very chain that prevents spiritual awakening. Not because the teacher intends to mislead you, but because your mind begins to whisper that awakening is something they possess and you must earn. The moment you believe that truth lives in someone else more than it lives in you, you reinforce the separation between seeker and sage, between the one who is lacking and the one who is complete. And this separation is exactly what awakening dissolves. So the trap is subtle and psychological, not dramatic or obvious. You may hear a teacher say, "Look inward." Yet instead of looking, you wait for them to give you confirmation that you've looked correctly. You may hear them say, "The answer is in your awareness." Yet you keep returning to their words to feel safe. And in this cycle, you replace your own inner authority with their voice, which Alan Watts warns becomes a new form of imprisonment disguised as devotion. This is why the path of spirituality demands honesty, not the performance of being humble before a teacher, but the courage to observe your own mind in real time, the longing to be led, the fear of being wrong, the desire to be chosen by someone who seems wiser. These tendencies are not failures. They are invitations to see the ego's hunger for reassurance. A teacher can illuminate these blind spots, but no teacher can cross the threshold for you, because awakening is not passed from hand to hand like a relic. It is recognized directly in your own awareness. Every genuine teacher, from ancient mystics to modern psychologists like Carl Jung, ultimately points you back to yourself. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this truth means that no spiritual guide, no matter how enlightened, can replace the work of looking. When you idealize a guru, you create a hierarchy that keeps you small. And this hierarchy becomes a veil over your own perception. When you fear disappointing a teacher, you silence the very intuition awakening is trying to strengthen. When you imitate their tone, their manner, their metaphors, you drift further from the raw, honest seeing that spiritual awakening requires. The danger is not the teacher. The danger is forgetting that the teacher is only a finger pointing to the moon. And if you stare at the finger too long, you never see the sky. A real teacher becomes a mirror, not a master. They reflect your potential rather than claiming ownership over your progress. They help you see your patterns, but they never ask to replace your discernment. They guide your questions, but they never demand that you surrender your inner compass. If someone's authority makes you shrink, step back. If someone's wisdom makes you doubt your own lived experience, breathe and return to your center. And if your spiritual practice becomes more about pleasing a guru than meeting yourself honestly, you have traded one identity for another, the identity of a seeker who forever believes the summit is somewhere outside themselves. The heartbeat of awakening is direct recognition, noticing awareness as it is, unborrowed, unmediated, free. A teacher can clear the dust from the window, but they cannot give you the sky. They can describe stillness, but they cannot silence your mind for you. They can speak truth, but they cannot hand you seeing. The moment you understand this, spirituality stops being performance and becomes presence. And the authority you once placed in another returns quietly to your own breath, your own perception, your own inner life, the only place real awakening has ever lived. If this message has opened your eyes to a deeper truth, leave your like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our spiritual insights. Comment below. I am free from all attachments, to affirm your growth and alignment on this awakening journey. 5. Chasing spiritual experiences distracts from truth. Mystical experiences can feel like the brightest moments on your path of spirituality because visions, bursts of cosmic consciousness, and waves of bliss make you believe that something extraordinary is finally happening to you. They are seductive precisely because they lift you above your ordinary life and give you a taste of something larger, something divine, something that feels like a secret doorway into the universe. Yet as powerful as these moments are, they rise and fall like waves on the ocean, brilliant, dramatic, unforgettable, but never permanent. And this is where many people unknowingly step into the trap that Alan Watts warned about. Because when these highs fade, the mind instantly begins searching for the next one, convinced that spiritual development must mean collecting more highs, deeper visions, and stronger sensations. The truth is that this constant chasing pulls you away from the very awakening you are hoping to reach. You become attached to the waves instead of learning to rest in the ocean beneath them. When I speak directly to you, I want you to see how subtle this trap is, because it disguises itself as progress. You tell yourself you are growing because you felt something intense. You tell yourself you are awakening because you saw something unusual. But when the high disappears, as it always does, you feel lost again, and you start believing that you must chase another experience to stay on the path. This is what many teachers call spiritual materialism, where inner states become spiritual trophies and mystical moments become something you try to possess rather than understand. What most people never realize is that true awakening is not a moment of intensity at all. It is the quiet, steady, ever-present awareness that exists underneath every moment when you are joyful, when you are afraid, when you are confused, and when you are simply washing dishes or walking outside under an ordinary sky. This awareness is always here, always unmoving, always watching, always holding every experience that comes and goes. It is the ocean itself, not the waves that briefly rise upon it. And because people are so addicted to the waves, they overlook the stillness that never leaves. The mind loves drama, proof, excitement, emotional fireworks, anything that feels special enough to confirm you are making progress. But spirituality matures when you stop needing proof and start realizing that truth does not need to shout. Awakening is not loud. It is not sudden. It is not a cosmic fireworks show. It is a quiet seeing, a grounded clarity, an inner steadiness that remains even when nothing extraordinary is happening. When you can rest in that awareness, when you can sit in silence without waiting for a vision or a sign, that is when real spiritual development begins to unfold. You stop chasing the extraordinary and start noticing the sacred in the ordinary. You stop measuring your worth by how intense your experiences are and begin recognizing the deeper transformation happening beneath the surface. And in that shift, you finally understand that you were never meant to collect waves. You were meant to sink into the vast, calm, unshakable ocean that has been holding you all along. 6. The dark night of the soul is unavoidable. Every authentic awakening leads you into the dark night of the soul, a place where everything you once relied on begins to fall apart. It feels as if life is deliberately pulling the ground from beneath your feet. Your spiritual practices stop working. Your beliefs lose their meaning. And even the presence of God seems to vanish. You start to question yourself. Why is this happening when I have done everything right? But the truth is, this collapse is not punishment. It is purification. The dark night burns away the illusions of control and the layers of spiritual pride that keep you attached to the idea of being enlightened. As Alan Watts once said, you are the universe experiencing itself. And to realize that truth, you must first lose every concept that separates you from it. This phase can feel terrifying because the mind no longer finds comfort in its usual certainties. You can no longer rely on spiritual highs or external validation. The prayers that once brought peace may now bring silence. The rituals that once grounded you now feel hollow. Yet this emptiness is not meaningless. It is sacred space where the false self dies so that the true self can awaken. Carl Jung called this descent a necessary stage in individuation, reminding us that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. When you fall into this darkness, the ego resists with all its strength, telling you to run toward new teachers, new philosophies, or new paths. But every escape only delays the transformation. The darkness you avoid today will return tomorrow until you dare to face it fully. When you stop running and allow yourself to sit within the unknown, something profound begins to unfold. The despair softens into stillness. The silence reveals wisdom. What once felt like abandonment now feels like invitation, a call from your soul to surrender every belief that kept you separate from life itself. In that surrender, you discover that God was never absent. Only your image of God was. You realize that awakening is not about reaching light, but about embracing both light and shadow with equal reverence. The dark night of the soul, then, is not a mistake in your spiritual journey. It is the journey. It dismantles every illusion until nothing false remains, leaving only what is pure, whole, and eternal within you. Through this passage, spiritual wisdom deepens not as theory, but as lived truth. And when you finally emerge, you do so not as someone who has found, but as someone who has become one with the divine pulse that has always been within. If this message resonates with you, comment below. I'm facing the dark night with courage. Your voice helps us understand you better and create deeper content for your journey. 7. The end of seeking is the beginning of true freedom. The end of seeking is often misunderstood because the mind believes spirituality and spiritual awakening must be earned through effort, discipline, or extraordinary experiences. Yet the deeper truth is far simpler and far more confronting. There is no path to awakening because the one who is walking the path is the same consciousness they are searching for. The moment you begin to see this, you notice that the seeker and the sought have never been two separate forces. They are a single movement of awareness looking at itself through different masks. This is why so many teachers repeat the same paradoxical truth. What you are seeking is already here. And the journey is not about becoming something greater, but about dissolving every false layer that convinces you that you are anything less than the ground of being itself. The ego resists this because it thrives on becoming better, becoming wiser, becoming awakened. But awakening is not an accomplishment. It is the quiet falling away of the illusion that there is someone inside you who needs to reach a higher state. As this illusion dissolves, you start recognizing that the identity you once protected so fiercely was nothing more than a temporary shape formed by memory, fear, habit, and conditioning. When that shape begins to soften, what remains is not a new or improved version of you, but the open, clear presence that has always been watching your life unfold from behind the scenes. This presence is not personal. It does not have preferences, judgments, or attachments, and it does not chase enlightenment or resist suffering. It simply is. And when you begin to rest as that presence even for a moment, you experience what many call true freedom, because the pressure to become fades, and the longing to find something outside yourself loses its grip. You realize that awareness has always been here, quietly holding every moment of your life, and nothing you could seek would bring you closer to yourself. From this clarity, even the most ordinary parts of life become sacred. When you wash your hands, you feel the water without a thinker behind the sensation. When you walk, there is only the movement of walking without the story of the walker. When you breathe, there is simply breath, not your breath, but breath happening in the vast field of awareness. This is the essence of spiritual awakening, returning to ordinary life with extraordinary clarity, seeing that the divine is not hidden in distant visions, but woven into the simplest moments you used to overlook. You begin to understand why mystics say enlightenment is not about escaping the world, but seeing it as it truly is, without distortion. As even the identity of the awakened one dissolves, something deeper reveals itself. The recognition that consciousness is not inside you. You are inside consciousness. You are a temporary expression of something timeless, appearing for a while as a human life. And when this becomes clear, the game of becoming ends. What survives is not the personality you once identified with, but the spacious awareness that shines through it. In that recognition, life stops being a search and becomes a simple, peaceful unfolding, where presence sees itself through every experience, every breath, every step, and realizes it was never divided to begin with. In the end, the dark test of awakening is not meant to break you. It is meant to reveal you. As Alan Watts teaches, awakening strips away the illusion of separation so you can finally meet the truth of who you are. If today's message from Spiritual Wisdom has helped you see your own journey more clearly, let it be a reminder that every moment of confusion, fear, or surrender is guiding you toward deeper awareness and inner freedom. If this spoke to your soul, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming teachings. Your awakening matters, and you don't have to walk this path alone.